Imagine walking through a medieval town square. The air is thick with the smell of bread, horses, and smoke. You see beggars in patched-up linen, merchants in wool, and a noble gliding by in fur-lined velvet. But here's the twist. Everyone knows exactly who these people are, just by looking at what they're wearing. In the Middle Ages, clothing wasn't just about warmth or modesty. It was a code, one stitched with threads of politics, religion, and fear. What you wore told others your social rank, your moral standing, your religion, even your marriage status. But this wasn't just symbolic. People could be punished, even imprisoned, for dressing above their station. Others were forced to wear certain clothes, not to express themselves, but to mark them as different. What we call fashion today was once a medieval battlefield. Today we're going deep into 10 powerful ways fashion reflected power, faith, and fear, and how what you wore could literally decide your fate. Let's start at the top, literally. The medieval elite used clothing like a modern CEO uses a luxury car or a private jet, not because they needed it, but to remind everyone else who's in charge. Royals and nobles wore exotic fabrics like silk, velvet, and ermine fur, materials so rare that just owning them was a statement. Kings controlled who could wear what. In some kingdoms, only royalty could wear purple, a color made from tens of thousands of crushed sea snails. Wearing it without permission, that could be seen as an act of treason. Nobles competed with each other in court through fashion one-ups long trains that dragged on the ground, elaborately embroidered sleeves, gold-threaded cloaks. These weren't just garments. They were walking declarations of power. Even servants weren't left out of this game. Many nobles required their staff to wear livery, custom clothing in the lord's colors, sometimes with their family crest. It made the servant's body into a moving flag, declaring ownership and loyalty. Medieval fashion was less about style and more about status signaling, a clear visual hierarchy worn on your body. In the medieval world, faith wasn't just something you practiced in private. It was something you wore on your body. The church had enormous influence, and it extended all the way to the closet. Modesty wasn't just a virtue, it was a requirement. Women were expected to cover their hair after marriage, often with a veil or wimple. For men, wearing long tunics with belts wasn't just tradition, it was obedience to social norms that aligned with religious expectations. Clergy, of course, had distinct garments, black cassocks, robes edged with fur or embroidery, each stitch symbolizing their role, their vow, their distance from worldly desires. Even colors were chosen for spiritual meaning, white for purity, red for sacrifice, purple for penance. But it wasn't just clergy being policed. Ordinary people were often punished for wearing clothing deemed immoral or immodest. Too short, too tight, too fancy? That could be labeled as vanity, a sin. The church linked flashy clothing with pride, and pride with damnation. What's even more shocking? During certain holy days or seasons like Lent, people were expected to change their clothing styles entirely, opting for plainer, more somber garments as a sign of penitence. And in towns where the church had political power, they could fine or excommunicate people just for dressing sinfully. Your wardrobe wasn't just your own. It belonged to your God, your priest, and your community's judgment. Now imagine this. You're a successful merchant. Business is booming, and you've got a little extra silver in your pouch. You decide to treat yourself to a beautiful velvet robe you saw a nobleman wear last week. But the next day, someone knocks on your door. It's not your tailor. It's a city official, here to fine you. Why? Because your robe violates the sumptuary laws. Sumptuary laws were legal regulations across Europe that controlled what people could wear based on their social status. These laws were designed to preserve the class system, keeping the peasants looking like peasants and the nobles unmistakably noble. In 14th century England, for example, no one under the rank of knight could wear fur, silk, or cloth of gold. In parts of Italy, even the number of buttons on your jacket was limited by law. In France, middle-class women were forbidden from wearing certain types of veils, lest they be mistaken for nobility. Breaking these laws wasn't just a faux pas, it was a crime. Fines were common. Repeat offenders could face public shaming or worse. What's even more twisted? These laws were rarely enforced on the rich. Nobles could break them with impunity, but if a shoemaker's wife wore an embroidered belt, she'd pay dearly for the crime of ambition. Fashion wasn't just regulated, it was weaponized. If you wore the wrong thing, you could be seen as disrespectful, rebellious, or even dangerous. In today's world, layering is a fashion choice. In the medieval world, it was a statement of identity. Every visible layer had a meaning. Start with the chemise, the base layer of linen, worn by virtually everyone. It was your undergarment, your sweat soaker, your second skin. Clean white linen was a sign of wealth. Why? Because it meant you could afford to wash your clothes, an expensive task that took time, firewood, soap, and servants. On top of that, you'd find a kirtle, a tunic, or a doublet, depending on your gender and region. Richer folks would wear more layers, not fewer, because the bulk showed off how much fabric they could afford. Fabric was currency. The more you had draped across your shoulders, the wealthier you looked. And then came the real luxury. Outer layers. Cloaks lined with fur, hoods trimmed with ermine, gowns with long sleeves that dragged on the ground. These were utterly impractical. But that was the point. If you didn't have to work, your clothes could afford to be ridiculous. And accessories? They told their own stories. A lady's girdle belt could indicate she was married or single. A brooch might show allegiance to a royal house. Rings and embroidery signaled regional pride or religious affiliation. To medieval eyes, your outfit wasn't just about function. It was a biography, one that everyone around you could read. Ever wonder why so many medieval paintings are filled with people in red, blue, gold, and green? These colors weren't chosen randomly. They carried deep symbolic power, and people in the Middle Ages understood them at a glance. Take blue. Today, it might be calming or cool. But in medieval Europe, blue, especially deep, rich indigo, was associated with the Virgin Mary. It symbolized purity, loyalty, and heavenly grace. That's why artists painted her robes in luminous blue, and why noblewomen began wearing blue gowns to project piety and virtue. Red? It was more complicated. Red could mean wealth and prestige if it came from rare imported dyes like kermes, but it could also signify passion, sin, or even danger. It was bold, powerful, and a little bit risky. Warriors, brides, and outlaws alike wore red. Green was tied to fertility, youth, and springtime, but it also hinted at magic and unpredictability. In folklore, fairies wore green. So did forest dwellers and mysterious strangers. Black, surprisingly, wasn't always about mourning. In some circles, black clothing, dyed deeply and evenly, was considered ultra-expensive because the dye was hard to get right. A merchant in a perfectly black robe might be signaling wealth, not grief. And white? It didn't mean wedding back then. It meant purity, chastity, and religious devotion. Nuns wore it. So did penitents. A bride in white would have raised more eyebrows than admiration. So yes, color was fashion. But it was also a medieval language, one spoken in fabric and thread, understood in a single glance. In the medieval world, dressing like someone wealthier than you wasn't ambition. It was an offense, a dangerous one. Clothing was how society instantly measured you. Were you a noble, a merchant, a servant, or something even lower? Your outfit announced it before you opened your mouth. And so, the biggest fear of the ruling class wasn't nudity, it was mimicry. What if a butcher wore brocade? What if a baker's wife started wrapping her hair like a duchess? That wasn't fashion, that was social rebellion. This fear is what fueled some of the strictest sumptuary laws in history. Across Europe, kings and councils banned upward dressing. You could be fined for wearing dyed fabrics if you weren't gentry. Embroidery with gold thread? Only for knights and their families. Velvet shoes? Reserved for barons or higher? And it wasn't just about keeping classes apart. It was about maintaining control. Because if everyone started dressing alike, how would you know who to bow to? Or who to tax? Interestingly, these laws were almost always broken. Middle-class families loved pushing the boundaries. Tailors became expert at adding elegance without crossing legal lines. Slightly longer sleeves, slightly richer linings, hidden embroidery. A quiet rebellion stitched into seams. The powerful were afraid of imitation, not because it was dishonest, but because it reminded them how fragile the system really was. We often look at medieval fashion through museum glass. Stiff garments on mannequins frozen in time. But peel back the velvet, the linen, and the gold thread, and you'll find something startling. We're not so different. Medieval clothing wasn't just practical, it was powerful. It told the world who you were, what you believed, who you feared, and where you fit in the chain of society. Sound familiar? Today we still wear uniforms, suits, lab coats, security vests, that signal power, trust, or submission. We still argue over who gets to wear what and why. And we still fear what clothing says when it doesn't follow the rules, whether it's too bold, too revealing, too foreign, or too other. Even the modern obsession with logos and designer brands? That's not new. In the medieval world, a noble's coat of arms was their status symbol. Embroidered on everything from robes to saddles, it was the original luxury branding. But perhaps the most enduring lesson is this. Clothing has always been about more than covering the body. It's been used to command respect, express belief, sow fear, and, at times, control entire populations. By studying medieval fashion, we're not just admiring the past. We're decoding centuries of human behavior, power struggles, and cultural identity, all woven into fabric. So next time you choose what to wear, think about it. What story are you telling, and who taught you to tell it that way? From the glittering halls of royalty to the cold, watchful eyes of the village square, fashion in the Middle Ages was far more than thread and cloth. It was a language, a weapon, a shield. It reflected power, it obeyed faith, and it was shaped deeply by fear. So, what surprised you most about medieval clothing? Was it the hidden laws, the superstitions, the idea that one wrong color could ruin your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And if you love diving into forgotten history with us, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Because in this world, and the medieval one, every stitch tells a story.